Great. Hey, Christian. Very excited to be chatting to you today about Spot. And maybe you could start off by giving a brief introduction, and then we'll dive into some of the nuances of Spot and information that you can share based on your deep expertise with the AWS service.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Daniel. My name is Christian. I'm ex-AWS for about a month and a half now. I was in AWS, part of the extended Spot service team. And yeah, before AWS, I created this open source automation for Spot instances called auto spotting. So I have quite a bit of background in this space. And at AWS, I've been involved with a lot of customers who try to optimize by using Spot, and have quite a few experiences from there that I can relate to.
It's hard to imagine someone with more depth of expertise in Spot, given that you developed the open source tool before even going to AWS, and then you worked directly at AWS, on the service and on professional services related to it. So, thank you so much for joining.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Maybe just as a starting point, for someone that has only ever used on-demand EC2 instances, what would be, your 2-sentence description of what Spot instances are?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, Spot is just spare capacity that is not used at the moment by on-demand customers. So AWS has these thousands and thousands of servers in each region, and not at all times all of them are used. But when there's somebody who needs an instance, it has to be there. So they always have to have this spare capacity. And what happens is you can get these as a steep discount. It can be up to 90%. Typically now it's about 60 to 70%, the average of them, some more, some less. And basically you get these at these high discounts, but then if somebody needs them, AWS will take them away from you with like 2 minutes notice. And the key to have capacity in these conditions is essentially to have diversification over multiple, they call them capacity pools. It's essentially instance types in availability zones. So the most instance types you can use and availability zones you can use in a particular configuration, the more resilient you are to these interruptions, and in particular to losing the capacity you have. Right. So then the application needs to be able to switch between these instance types pretty much at any time, and to be flexible over them.
Right.
So that's pretty much.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the kind of knee-jerk reactions, or one of the general perceptions of Spot instances is they're only appropriate for fault-tolerant applications and workloads. And this is somewhat related to what you were just talking about, but can you expand on when and where you think Spot instances are appropriate?
Right, so it's exactly like that. So you have to be fault tolerant to sustain these interruptions without your customers noticing or your users noticing anything. And then you have to be flexible with multiple instance types so that you can diversify over a wide range of instance types. So many applications such as containerized applications, big data, things like EMR are a good fit for Spot. But most nowadays is about containers, big data. If you have auto scaling groups, is also where I started with auto spotting, right. To look into auto scaling groups. And you have to have applications that start relatively fast and that can sustain individual instance failures, essentially.
Right. Well, great. Maybe this is a perfect segue into you explaining a bit more about auto spotting and the mechanics of how it works.
Right. So when I started it was all about doing replacement of existing on-demand instances with Spot instances. And it was doing it on like a cron basis. So every 5 minutes, it would do some sort of replacement. And over time, I evolved it into a more event-driven approach. So the way it works right now is it looks at your groups whenever there is a new instance being launched in the auto-scaling group. as long as the group is selected to be used by auto-spotting, you just have to tag the group and auto-spotting will take it over. And then auto-spotting will notice these instances being launched. And for each new instance being launched, it replaces it, it clones it with an identical Spot instance and swaps it out of the group and swaps in this Spot instance. And essentially you're replacing the entire capacity with Spot without having to do any configuration changes. So, and that's kind of the main thing that people don't realize about auto-spotting. It's optimized for these environments where you may run them for a while. You don't want to touch the configuration except for having the instances replaced. Maybe not even all of them, just a percentage of them.
Right.
And that's kind of the main use case is for adopting Spot on things where you don't really want to disrupt them too much by changing it to different setup.
And are you automatically doing the diversification that you talked about that makes it more resilient?
Right. Yeah. So whenever there is a new instance being launched, I compute a range of instance types automatically based on the initial instance, and I fire an API call to EC2. Give me any of these. I give them actually order by price, and try to give me any of these in this order, whichever is available right now. So then the API will give me the first that's available, and then I will run with that.
Right.
That's how it works.
Amazing. Broadly speaking, what's the most that you've seen a company save by intelligently adopting Spot instances?
Yeah, I mean, I cannot really talk numbers. I signed a bunch of documents, but I can say the figures were like in the 8 figures. So yeah, it's significant money, but it depends a lot on the scale of the company. And yeah, you have to be able to roll it out quite widely at the company. So that's kind of the main requirement to see such figures. You have to have certain scale.
How do you see the process of adoption, of auto spotting specifically, or just generally company decides they want to look at Spot as a way to start reclaiming claim savings from their cloud bill? Do you see companies rolling out in let's take these fault tolerant workloads, or let's take these batch jobs that need to be done and start experimenting in Spot? Or do you see more of that would be a more team or a more isolated initial approach? Or do you see companies adopting it holistically right away? How do you see companies that are successful adopting Spot phasing into it?
I mean, most of the companies outside of auto spotting are doing it into this slower model. So you have initiatives driven at scale within the larger organizations, and then they try to bit by bit adopt Spot like on a team by team basis. And yeah, that's fine. It reduces the risks. It takes a bit longer, but eventually you get there.
Right.
And it's a good approach. Like if you're a Fortune 500, you probably don't want to rock the boat so bad. But for like smaller companies, they can afford to be a bit more, let's say, dare a bit more. And they sometimes they do things like with auto spotting. You could do things like enable it in an opt-out model and configure a percentage of the groups so that all the ASGs at a given company would adopt Spot for like 40% of the fleet. Right. Back at my previous employer before AWS at Here Technologies, we actually did something similar, but we went all in, and we did it for all their R&D accounts. So they had in the hundreds of development accounts running EC2, and
where the downtime
we had an organization, and we just deployed auto spotting literally overnight, replacing everything to Spot. And that was like a big move. There were a few issues with that. Turns out there were people running things like Cassandra or memory databases on their ASGs, and if you do it like that, and without proper automation to replace those instances, yeah, there were a bit of cases where they lost a bit of data, but it was development accounts, so that we could recover, and there was no impact.
Right.
But yeah, normally I would not do that anymore. So I would do a percentage around 40 to 50%, and you can still recover from that without nobody noticing anything.
Yeah. Amazing. Spot started with EC2, at this point extends to Fargate. How do you see Spot as a pricing mechanism evolving at AWS?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not able to talk about what they are doing under the hood and what other services are they building, but what you can see from outside is pretty close to what's going on. You have these pricing model, on-demand spot savings plans, and essentially you can adopt them from various services. And besides Fargate and EC2, Spot is also quite big in the container space, where it integrates nicely with EKS and ECS. Now they also released recently something called Carpenter, which makes it easier for EKS environments to adopt Spot in a nicely diversified way. There's also EMR, which is pretty big on Spot, and a lot of the customers who use EMR should be looking into Spot. Yeah, it's quite a good fit for Spot as well. So yeah.
Got it. So less new services specifically adopting Spot as a pricing mechanism, and more services that are using ECS figuring out how to work with Spot in intelligent ways.
Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Okay. We're almost at time, so gonna wrap up soon. But thank you so much, Christian, for spending a brief session talking about Spot. And I'm sure people will be really excited to understand more about Spot generally and more about auto spotting specifically.